one decided that a house had to be taken down before the wrecking ball comes, obviously the thing to do is to take out any of the valuable contents of the house. Sometimes a house is chas v'shalom condemned and is in imminent danger of collapsing, and a judgment has to be made whether or not there is time, whether we can afford to take out the valuable contents of the house. If chas v'lahasku, a fire is burning, and the fire chief says this roof is going to cave in any moment, the main beam is going to give in, the walls are going to come crushing in. So you don't ask whether or not you can take the items out of the house, you just leave the house. There is no issue. One would imagine that when the Kohen had to declare a house tameh because of tumas negoyim, it was of vital importance to do so immediately. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu handpicked this house for miraculously displaying a nega out of its wall, and if the entire 3-week process has been exhausted, and it seems now that the nega is here to stay, the house must come down. A special tumah is declared upon the house. And under these circumstances, one would venture to think that this would be the spiritual equivalent of a fire, of a situation where there is imminent danger. And whether or not there are utensils in the house, some cheap kalim that may become tummy as a result of this, should be insignificant. The kohen should just declare it tummy right away, and the house should be taken down. Yet the pasuk makes a point of saying that it was done exactly in the opposite way. When the determination has been made that indeed the house is tummy, so v'tziva hakayin ufilu esabayis. The kohen first gives the command that the house should be emptied out, and only after the kalim have been removed from the house does the kohen declare the house tameh, which would by extension also be matam anything in the house. Now, if the pasuk makes a point of this, of clearly stating it should be done in this order, let's take a closer look and see what type of utensils is the Torah trying to say for us. His wooden kalim, his clothes, his metal kalim, even if they become tummy, there's no problem. They can become tahor again by immersing them in the mikveh. So the Torah would not make a point of trying to say that the work of tabling it in a mikveh. Clearly the pasuk is trying to save the keli. It shouldn't be lost. So which keli is lost? Clearly, the intent of the pasuk is to save those type of utensils that cannot be purified in a mikveh, which are kli cheres, pottery, the cheapest kind of keli. And Chazal established over here a principle that a Torah chas al mammon shel Yisrael. The Torah is rachmanis on the mammon of Klal Yisrael, and it is a lesson for us not to treat any of our belongings in an insignificant way. From the most expensive of our possessions to seemingly mundane things. If it has value, then we are supposed to accord it honor and do our best to maintain it. Okay, so it's an important lesson. Of course, it takes into account the whole union of Baltashkas and so on. But let's put this aside for a moment and focus on another aspect of this. In all due respect to this idea, to this concept of appreciating what you have, if the Torah had to teach us this inyan of a Torah chas al mammon shel Yisrael, why here in the Parsha of Negoim? Why in Parshas Metzora? And the answer is explained by the Be'er Moshe of the Yosef Rebbe Chaim Levracha, that precisely in the Parsha of Negoim, in the Parsha of punishment, does the Torah emphasize the law for Klal Yisrael. This lesson of a Torah chas al mammon shel Yisrael puts the whole inyan of tzaraf and all of its ramifications into context. Chazal understand the lesson of the Torah having rachmanis in the pottery as follows. If the Rebbeinu Shalom had so much rachmanis on kli cheres, which is worth almost nothing, kal v'chayim, the Rebbeinu Shalom has more rachmanis on a person's more valuable possession. And if the Rebbeinu Shalom has rachmanis on a person's more valuable possession, kal v'chayim, that he has rachmanis on the person himself, on his son, on his daughter. And if the Rebbeinu Shalom has so much rachmanis on people who sin, for tzaraf afflicts only those who sin, kal v'chaymer, how much more so the Rebbeinu Shalom has rachmanis on tzaddikim. The severe punishments and the difficult process that comes along with tzaraf pertains only to Klal Yisrael, not to the Ummah Ha'olam. The Gemara says, Hakel mitamin v'negoyim chutz min ha'akel. Because Klal Yisrael is held to a higher standard, therefore, the punishment is more severe. Therefore, a change in their attitude or improper behavior manifests itself, at least in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, in a physical reality that was tangible and could be pointed out. In other words, when the Rebbeinu Shalom punishes us, it is for a variety of reasons. Direction, a warning for a person to do tshuva. Sometimes the idea may be yisurim, to be memarik, avoinos, to cleanse the person so he can go straight into Gan Eden. And even the punishment of Gehenna in the Olam Ha'emes is not HaKadosh Baruch Hu's revenge. Gehenna is a purification process. Naturally, the more mud that there is in the hair, the more it hurts when you have to comb it out. But the act of combing it out is not a gruesome act of torture. It's an act of love. It's an act of kindness. Sometimes kindness hurts. There's the famous story of the person that came to Shlomo HaMelech and said, I beg of you, teach me the language of the birds. I know that the birds are privy to certain information as it's channeled into this world. And Shlomo HaMelech told his old friend, trust me, it's better for you not to know. And he begged and begged and begged and said, please, please. And so he insisted so much that Shlomo HaMelech taught him the language. And that night he hears the way the birds say, the next year the wheat crop is not going to do well. So he sells all of his wheat fields and he buys barley. Everyone else loses their money. He makes so much money. He's laughing. People are so envious of him. The next year he hears that the barley is not going to do well and the wheat is going to do well. So he reverses it. He sells his barley fields and he buys his wheat fields. And again, for a second year in a row, his shares are up. Everyone else is down. What's your secret? How did you know this? People are begging him, but he refuses to say. He wasn't going to reveal this to everyone else. This was his opportunity now to excel, to be beyond and past everyone else that he always competed with. So that night he hears that the birds are saying that his house is going to be attacked by those who are jealous. They plan to loot him. No problem. Now that he knows about it beforehand, he hires many bodyguards and police, and the attackers are captured. The next night he hears the birds say that in a matter of days he is going to suffer a terrible attack and die. Now what was he to do? Could he hire bodyguards? Could he sell his fields? He had no room here to manipulate. How could he avoid this? So he ran to Shlomo HaMelech and said, what do I do now? And Shlomo HaMelech said, I told you, it's better for you not to know. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu punishes you by you losing your money or by taking a loss in your assets, so you rethink your actions, you check through, where did I go wrong? You give it your best estimate to try to understand what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from you, and you try to fix your situation, you daven better, you learn better, you give more tzedakah. And sometimes if that doesn't work, if the person doesn't do enough tshuva, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu will bring upon him more severe financial loss. And if that doesn't work, even a complete financial wipeout. And sometimes the tshuva that is needed for that particular person to save him is the severe pain of someone breaking into his house, where he feels as if his abode has been violated, his whole security has been breached. But all of that is part of the tshuva process. All of that wakes a person up to the realization that this world isn't really anything. It's all temporary. I got to chaperayim where it really counts. I got to put my emphasis on what's going to stay with me forever. That's the normal process. It is only as a last resort that the person's life comes into question. And even that, if that is the case, it is for the best of the person. But you, my friend, could have avoided all of this. You could have avoided all of this if you had suffered the regular frustrations that everyone else suffered. If you dealt with them accordingly. But no. You have to be an overchach. You have to find a way to circumvent it, to bypass it. So now, I can't help you, Shlomo HaMelech. What's going to happen to you now is also for your good. It'll ultimately bring you to your makom of menucha and your tikkun. But it could have been done perhaps in an easier way. I begged of you, said Shlomo, live a normal life. It wasn't worth it. Chazal tell us the respective levels of tziras and the different kinds of tziras, whether it afflicts a person's house, a person's clothes, or a person's body, are all different ways of how HaKadosh Baruch Hu warns a person it's time to do tshuva. It's time to look into yourself and to say, wait a second, where is my life disappearing to, and why am I letting the days pass by like this? These are all respective wake-up calls on different levels, and depending on how a person responds to level number 1, he determines whether or not there will be a level number 2. So let's look at the union of Nigoi Batim. We said before, it's a 3-week process. If we have exhausted the entire process now, and we're ready to destroy the person's house, the person may, chas v'sholom, think, that's it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu hates me. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want me anymore. He's throwing me out of my house. My whole life is caving in on me. The roof on my head is being taken off. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, no, just the opposite. If there are extreme measures being taken over here, it's because it is extreme measures that are necessary to help you. And that is why, out of all places in the entire Torah, to emphasize this inyan, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has rachmanis, even on your kli cheres, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want you to lose your pottery if it's not necessary, it's indicated right over here in this Parsha of Tzaraf. Even if you're in a situation of life where chas v'sholom, your house is being destroyed. You can't pay the mortgage, you're being thrown out of your house, Rachmana litzlan. That's it, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't care for me. He has not helped me. Absolutely not. Here is where HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I wouldn't want you to lose an earthenware cup if it wasn't necessary. I have Rachmanis on you, on everything that's dear to you, and everything that's important to you. And if there is a manifestation of punishment, even in an extreme way, it's because right now this is the best thing for you. Respond properly. Think into yourself. Be makabel the yisurim b'ahava. And as a result, you'll understand one day why this is the greatest thing for you. But in order to depict that the punishment is a punishment of love, therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's appreciation to whatever we own is cited and is taught to us right here as the house is about to cave in. In a similar vein, we find by Yosef Atzadik. When his brothers sold him, so even though Arabs usually carry oil, which has a terrible odor, Chazal said that eventually made a nest for Yosef Atzadik, that those particular Arabs were carrying very pleasant-smelling psalmim. Now I ask you, a young child is being ripped away by his fathers, almost murdered by his brothers, sold into slavery. This is how HaKadosh Baruch Hu appeases him. Here you can smell this instead of that. Wouldn't that kind of an appeasement appear frivolous as compared to the horror that he was about to endure? And the answer is no. Because the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu arranged for Yosef Atzadik to smell the good psalmim, explains of Chaim Shmulevitz, was a message to Yosef Atzadik. The message was, you are not Hefker. I know what's happening to you is a horror beyond your imagination. Your own brothers almost killed you and they're selling you away to slavery. You're being separated from your family, from your father. You're being taken to a strange country. There's a reason it has to happen this way. It's all part of the plan. V'haraya, there is no senseless suffering, that even 1 ounce of extra suffering that was not destined for you is going to be avoided. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is keeping tabs on the situation. Even during the ultimate crisis in Tzar, think how much chesed is being done. You may say, but who needs it? Of course, I would rather not have the Tzar and not have this chesed. And the answer is, the point of the chesed is that it's indicative of what the whole situation of the Tzar is. It's not a hefkerwelt. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is doing this to you. You don't know why. One day you will look back and understand it was all for the best. One day when you reach your ultimate menucha, you will understand that your menucha is only because of the frustrations you had to endure. But for right now, it's very difficult to accept that. But for right now, look into the little chesed that's happening in the course of the major crisis and say, you see, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not giving me unnecessary pain. And therefore, whatever frustrations I have to endure is necessary. When the Talmidim of Yochanan ben Zakkai came to visit him, the Gemara tells us in Masechtas Brachos, they found him crying. They asked him, Rebbe, why are you crying? And he said that there are 2 ways before me, Gehenna and Gan Eden. How do I know to which one they are taking me? And then he gave them the bracha, Yirotza Shimoyer Shemayim Alechem Kamar Yavasav Adam, that you should fear Hashem the way you fear people. And B'Shas Tirasi, right before he actually left this world, he left them with 2 things. He said, first of all, take the kelim out of the room, so they shouldn't become tamei, because when there's a dead body in the room, all utensils in the room become tamei. And the second thing he said was, prepare a chair for Chizkiyahu, the king of Yehuda, for his neshama has come to greet me now and bring me to Ganei. The difficulties here are obvious. First, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is crying, he doesn't know if he's going to Ganei or to Gehenna. And then he's worried about the pottery that's going to become tamei, and therefore you're going to have to destroy them, because you can't immerse them in a mikveh. We may lose a couple of dollars over here. And then he says, prepare a chair for Chizkiyahu Melech Yehuda. How does all of this relate with each other? And notwithstanding the issue of the connection between these three things, imagine someone is about to leave this world, the Nasi of Klal Yisrael, and Talmidim are standing around him, and what does he say to them? Remember to put the milk in the refrigerator, or left it on the table. That's in as much as what he said. Remember to take the kalim out, because it's going to become tummy. You won't be able to use them. That's the message. That's what's important now. And the answer is, explains the Ben Moshe from the Yerush Rebbe, when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, take out the pottery, he was referring to our Pasha, where the Torah says, take the pottery out of the house before the Kohen declares the house tummy. I know it seems like, and in the case of the Pasha, the roof is like caving in over your head. That doesn't mean HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't love you. HaKadosh Baruch Hu cares for you. HaKadosh Baruch Hu cares even for your pottery. That was the message of Yochanan ben Zakkai was leaving his people with. Leaving them post-Korban, leaving them during one of the most difficult times for Klal Yisrael, where the future was so terribly uncertain. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai insisted on leaving them with a message. I know things may be difficult, but they're not hefker. Everything that's happening is happening with a cheshbon. HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves you. HaKadosh Baruch Hu watches over your kli cheres, which won't be lost if it's not necessary. As a result, his next statement was, bring a chair for Chizkiyahu Melech Yehuda. Besides for what the Mekabolim brings, that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was the neshama of Chizkiyahu Melech Yehuda. Chizkiyahu Melech Yehuda, the Ben Moshe explains, throughout his life was Me'oris Chusim for Klal Yisrael. There was no greater educator of Klal Yisrael, the one who was Soimach Ge'ulu L'Tfilah, as Chizkiyahu Melech Yehuda was. Before a person's Tetira, sometimes the persona that he emulated most during his lifetime comes to greet him. The Chavetz Chaim said, bring a chair for the Vilna Gaon. Rav Shlomo Hyman, great Rosh Yeshiva of Torah V'das, who all of his life mutchered and taught and learned Rabbi Akiva Eiger, said before his Petira, bring a chair for Rabbi Akiva Eiger. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, with his last words, with his last message to Klal Yisrael, how HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves every single yid, and every person has his tikkun, every person has his ultimate high point where he can reach, and he expressed his own concern about Gehenna or Gan Eden, whatever that means, of course, is a discussion for itself. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, remember, Yisurim are directional signals. They are not a HaKadosh Baruch Hu's revenge. And therefore, as an immediate result of this statement, he said, bring a chair for Chizkiyahu Melech Yehuda. A person, Baruch Hashem, makes a simcha, he sits down, he decides when he can get the chasna hall or whatever other considerations have to be taken into account, and they decide that the time for the chasana is going to be before Pesach. April 9th is a good day, they decide. That's when this uncle can come in from Toronto, and that brother-in-law can come in from Montreal, and the young couple that's already married can come in from Eretz Yisrael. It's close enough to Pesach, not too close to Pesach, they reason, and they have a hall. Everything falls into place, and now they sit down and they're writing the invitation. And they notice that the chasana is going to now be on the first day of Parshas Metzora, especially on an Ibri Yar where generally Tazria and Metzora are separate. So they have a funny feeling. They're going to write on the invitation that the chasana is going to be B'Shatayva Mitzlachas Yom Aleph L'Seder Metzora. You want the word Metzora on my child's chasana invitation? So what do people do? So people look for psukim in the Pasha instead of naming the Pasha, or some people just write Yom Aleph L'Seder Tahara. And we are supposed to know, which indeed we do, that Tahara means Metzora. And if we don't, hopefully we'll check the date and therefore know when to come to the Chasana. Now, Hanach Lehem Yisrael Amein Nevi'im, B'nei Nevi'im Haim, the Menhagim of Klal Yisrael, especially when it comes to Lashain and Nikiya, of course, no one can shepherd with that, no one can argue against that, no one can criticize that. But the truth is, perhaps if we take a closer look at what Parshas Metzora means, it isn't as ominous, or we shouldn't have the ill feeling toward it, the way it would seem on the surface. Many ask a kasha. The bulk of Parshas Tazria, most of Parshas Tazria, discusses the halachas of leprosy, of a nega, the respective different kinds of negayim, all the different halachas, on which part of the body the nega is found, the various different kinds of colors, to the kindness to declare it tummy, and so on. What does most of Parshas Metzora talk about? Okay, you have the parsha of negayim on houses, which is in Parshas Metzora and not in Parshas Tazria. But then you have the halachis of other kinds of tumah. Being that we're introduced to the parsha of negayim in Parshas Tazria, and therefore you have all the halachis of what a nega is, wouldn't it make more sense to refer to Parshas Tazria as Parshas Metzora and some other name for Parshas Metzora? Yet, in the parsha that deals mostly with negayim, or at least describes to us what a nega is, over here we don't name the parsha Parshas Metzora. We name it Tazria. So I saw in the Sefer Paparos L'Torah a American part. And Hachanami, in Parshas Tazria, the Torah defines to us what a nega is and all the intricacies of negayim. In Parshas Tazria, we are introduced to the problem. Here, the person gets the rude awakening that he spoke Lashon Hara, or he was over one of the other Averos, Gases Haruach, or one of the 7 things that leads to Lashon Hara, and he now has a nega. He has a problem. We don't call this parsha Parshas Metzora. We don't want to name the parsha after this person's problem. It's Rachmanis on this person. Now, when we get to Parshas Metzora, how does Parshas Metzora begin? In the day of his cleansing, here we're not talking about the problem. Here we're talking about the solution. Yes. The Metzora was sent out in Chutz Lamachna. He can't have any shaychus with people. He's an outcast to society because of his Lashon Hara. But now he has already had his kapara. He had time to reflect. He had time to think. Now we say to the same kind that declared him Tameh, you have the second phase of your job, the most important phase of your job. You have to declare him Tahar. And you, Kayin, you have to go out of the camp to him because he can't come in now. He's Tameh. And the kind will begin one of several steps over here. Several stages of Tahara. So you see what's happening? Only when we're talking about the solution, only when we're talking about purifying the Metzora, do we suddenly refer to the parsha as Parshas Metzora. The names of the parshas have already taken into account the feeling that people have in Chasana invitations. We wouldn't call a parsha Parshas Metzora when it's time to send that person Michutz Lamachna, when we're dealing with the pain, the difficulties. Adarabah, then we cover it up, then we call it Parshas Tazria. Now when the Torah is saying that every single Yid has a tikkun, no one gets pushed away regardless of how far he is, and regardless of what he did wrong and what he said wrong, there is a tahara process. There is a set of instructions to bring every single Yid back into the Machna. And we're going to send that Kayin out only now do we refer to the Parshas Metzora. And not in a negative context, but within the framework of saying even this Metzora, the worst Tumah, the one that has to be sent out of all 3 Machnas, even this Metzora has a parsha that begins describing his process of Tahara. And the great Kayin is directed to go out to him, stop everything, leave everything, travel out to him, and make sure that he finds his way back. We don't have to be embarrassed of Parshas Metzora. Parshas Metzora is not saying, Yutzurua, leave. Parshas Metzora is saying, even the Metzora has a way in. Now when the Kohen goes out to visit the Metzora Michutz Lamachna, there's a whole process. We take 2 birds, because birds are constantly chirping, a reminder to the Metzora that his constant talking has got him into trouble. In addition to 2 birds, he brings 8 erez, a piece of cedar wood, the tall cedar wood, that to remind us that Negoyim come due to gases haruach, a person being too conceited, thinking too much about himself, and he has to bring a scarlet thread and a certain type of grass to remind him that his takana is, for him to be healed, he has to lower himself from his pride. The lashon is shnitelas v'yezayif, and he has to consider himself like a worm, and like this special kind of grass. Now, considering oneself like a worm, that sounds like something that can give someone an inferiority complex. David HaMelech said, Anechi Selas V'La'ish, I am a worm, not a person. But that's not what Chazal mean. Considering yourself like a worm does not mean the person should go around thinking I'm nothing but a worm. Rather, the lesson is, I saw in a sefer, a worm serves Hashem. A worm serves Hashem because it was created with instincts, it was created with certain abilities, very limited abilities, but whatever it can do, it does do. And the worm plays its role in the overall cycle of nature. So the worm is basically doing what HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave it the power to do. Okay, doesn't have much of a choice, doesn't have a bechira. However, no one has any tightness on the worm. No one is angry at the worm for not getting smicha, for not getting straight olives. It's just a worm. Well, when a person begins to think of himself so much better than his next door neighbor, because I am so much more talented, I am so much more handsome, I have so much more of a better voice, I have so much more money in the bank, and therefore I am in a different social class than my neighbor. That kind of thinking leads to tzaras, and the refuah for that is we sit down and we explain to this person, look, when push comes to shove, ultimately by the din of the cheshbon, the issue is not going to be what you accomplished on this world. The issue is, what capabilities did you have? What were your circumstances? What talents did the HaKadosh Baruch Hu give you? And did you exercise them? That's going to be the ultimate decision of Char and Einish. That is going to lead to the ultimate direction of where a person is, Liyasid Lavai. What did you do with the kashroinus that were given to you? And if your neighbor has 30% of the wealth that you have, but he used all 30% for the right thing, then he is way ahead of the game. Maybe down here in this world, in terms of dollars and cents, you have a lot more than he does. But where it counts, where it lasts forever, he may have a whole lot more than you do. Because wealth in Shemayim is measured, what did you do with what you have? What you have is irrelevant. It's the most insignificant factor, exactly the opposite of this world. And therefore, when you start thinking about how much smarter you are than so-and-so, or how much better dressed you are than so-and-so, stop and think. That just means that there's more that's going to be asked of me, and more that's expected of me. So why do I think I'm better than him? So David HaMelech says, Anechi Salas V'La'ish, I view myself like a worm, not like a person. What did he mean to say? No, he didn't walk around depressed, sad, I'm nothing but a worm. He meant to say, no one has any tightness on a worm, because a worm does what it's supposed to do. And as a matter of fact, a worm that does what it's supposed to do is a lot better off than a person who does not do what he is supposed to do, given his instincts and his abilities. So David HaMelech said, I hope that I'm at least not worse than an animal. That at least I'm playing my part in this world. I fit in where I'm supposed to fit in, because everyone has something to add. And that's the lesson to the metzora. Until now, you considered yourself an eitz erev, a looming piece of cedar wood. And right now, if you want a refuah, you have to bring that down to ushni selas, literally a string of wool that is dyed crimson red, but helas means worm. Bring yourself down to the level that you understand the lesson of the worm. Now, after going through the whole process over here, the metzora is permitted to come back into the city. Until now, he was michutz lamachna, he had to be all alone. Why was he all alone michutz lamachna? Well, a man once came to Rav Fischel Schachter during the terrible cholera epidemic that was going on then. And he said to him, Rabbi, I think I know the reason for the epidemic. And Rav Fischel Schachter said, okay, if there's anything constructive, I'll listen. So the man said that he took it upon himself to go out and seek the reason. And he walked down the block and he was looking into people's windows and he noticed that Beryl does this avera and Shimon eats without the proper bracha and Yankel eats chicken with the questionable hashgacha, and he had a whole list for everyone on the block. And he very proudly told Rav Fischel Schachter that he did a very, very thorough investigation. And so-and-so is not mechanech his children properly, and I think that if the Rebbe will take care of this list, that'll solve all our problems. So Rav Fischel Schachter said, okay, I'm going to start with the first problem. And the first problem is you. And I suggest that in order to solve the problem with you, is that why don't you move out of town for a while and spend a couple of days in the woods? So the man said, me, what did I do wrong? And why should I move out of town? So Rav Fischel Schachter explained to him that during a time of crisis, if anything, you should be knocking on people's doors and ask how you can help them, not looking through their windows and trying to decide what everyone else is doing wrong. And if you think you have all the answers and you're so much better than all these other people, your brachos are better, your chinuch is better, your Torah is better, and therefore you have nothing to do with your time besides walking down the street looking through windows, which you're not allowed to do. So I suggest that we give you the same prescription that Torah gave for a metzora. The metzora that is also conceited, the metzora that also has something to say about everybody in town. He was told, spend some time michutz lamachna. And that's not a suggestion, that's a command. If you're living amongst people, triggers you just to look around and figure out where everyone is doing something not right and how you're so much smarter, then you are misreading the purpose. You are misunderstanding the schus that you didn't have to live together, the community life that we have. So you want to think into what's around you? So go into the woods, leave the camp, sit there for a long time without any other human being around you, and then think into your environment and what's around you. I want you to think about people. I want you to be friendly with people, to see where you can help them, not to put together lists of people's faults. Now, so the metzora, our metzora, has already spent his time michutz lamachna. He's already realized what it means to live alone and without the benefit of other people around him. He's learned his lesson. He's ready to accept upon himself to become a new person, to work on his geyser, to work on everything else. He is coming back now. He went through this whole process with the birds, with the shnit elas. He's allowed back into the city. But his tahara process is not over. He is still considered tameh. And not just a small level of tameh. He's still considered so tameh that he's a primary source of tameh. He's considered an av tameh. He defiles others on contact. And even though he's allowed back into the camp, he doesn't have to stay in the woods anymore, he doesn't have to stay in michutz lamachna, but he is still not permitted to live with his wife, and he cannot enter the Har Bayis, he cannot enter the Temple Mount, he cannot partake of any karbonos or any kachim. What does he have to do now? Well, he has to count 7 days. On the 7th day, he was shaved by the kohen a second time. He immerses himself in the mikveh and his garments, and then he brings karbonos that are going to complete his tahara. Why does it come, however, in 2 stages? Didn't the cedar wood and the shnit elas, the 2 birds, the process that was done michutz lamachna, didn't that already send the message to him how he has to purify himself, that he has to bring himself down from his gaiva? How come he goes through that whole procedure, and now he has to wait again? Now that some of the tumah was lifted from him, now that he can come into the camp, but he still can't go home. He still has to sit outside of his tent. He's still not allowed in the Beis Hamikdash. Why not have his whole tahara in one process? The Rebbe of Shmelta said, a person who lives this kind of lifestyle, which led up to him becoming a metzora, the lashon hara, the constant criticism, the negoyim, the gases ruach, thinking about how great he is and always worrying that he's not getting enough kavod, so on and so on. So this kind of personality affects 2 people. It affects basically anyone that he encounters, but worse than that, it affects his own family. His own family that need the love, that need the nurturing of a father, that need the smol doicha v'yamin mekareves. They don't have it, because this particular father is more obsessed with his own kavod, with his own honor than anything else. So, first of all, we sent him away. No one else has to suffer from your gaiva anymore. When he gets the lesson after sitting long enough alone michutz lamachna, he's allowed back in. We've already lowered his level of gaiva, the Rebbe of Shmelka explained, and will allow you to walk the streets, will allow you to talk to people. But before we allow you into your house, we want to explain something to you. No one suffers from a difficult personality more so than the family of that person. So we bedavka keep him out of his house. We allow him into the city, but we keep him out of his house for another 7 days, to continue impressing upon him the importance of a modest demeanor, of a nivus, of thinking more about someone else and less about yourself, of thinking how you can help, how you can support, rather how you can crush. You may be ready to meet the person on the street, but we're not sure we're ready to let you back to your own family yet. There's an additional 7 days over here of tahara, of bittul, that ends with shaving off his hair, sort of taking any kind of gaiva away from him. Bring the karbonos, and now and only now are you ready to return home. We mentioned this before. Zoli Me'eblach once said, when you give Mussar to people and you start talking about difficult personalities, the crowd always gets quiet and you get their perfect attention. Why? Because everyone is thinking, that's my husband, that's my wife, that's my mother, that's my father. That's the difficulty with my son. When we talk about these things, there's a tendency that we have, instead of realizing, no, the lesson is for me. We begin to point our fingers and say, if that person would change, my life would be easier. And in a sense, we then defeat the whole purpose of the shir. Definitely the lesson of the metzora. No one is perfect, and everyone's personality can change. But we cannot change someone else's personality by instructing the other person to do it. What we can do is work on our own. We can work on our own midas. We can instruct ourselves. And if you work long enough on your own midas, then eventually you have an effect on others.
This shir is distributed by Koladas, 11 Stay Chemes Street, Yerushalayim. For donations, please call 02-5383-999. Fax 02-538-0267. Post Box 57035.